Okay, hello. Good noon to everybody. So as you may see here, I noticed in my inbox a few minutes ago that the mask mandate for LSU has been lifted. It's good news for me in particular because I now have to teach 3 times in a day, and I think my voice is going to be a bit shot by next class. I think you guys will be all right for this class. I have been teaching twice a day, Tuesday, Thursdays. So hopefully not too big a deal. Do let me know if you can't hear me in the back with the filter. I also don't really think, on a personal note, I don't think my mask is really doing a whole lot of good. Certainly not for myself, maybe a little bit, at least if I spit when I talk, then at least the front row. Hopefully I don't. I'll try to stand back. But in my own mind, it wasn't too pointful. I wouldn't come to campus if I was sick, so I'm not likely to spread. I am vaccinated, so not likely to spread. So anyway, I'm happy to see that so that you guys can see me better. I can see some of you better, get to know you a little more personally than, like this. Of course, this morning I'm like, well, I'm running late. I don't have to shave, right? I'll be wearing a mask all day. So, well, oops. So, hello, my name is Sam Snow. I do have a brother named John Snow. He knows nothing, comparatively at least. No, I'm kidding. I do have a brother, and his name is Jonathan. So, yes, John Snow. And if you haven't heard of the famous epidemiologist John Snow, Dr. John Snow, I'd like to say that I'm related, but he didn't have any children, so at least not directly, right? Okay, so I've been teaching this specific course for the civil side. We call it civil, but we're supposed to separate our EVEG 3110 between environmental majors and non-environmental to try to go a little more advanced into the environmental course. This semester is the first time I started teaching that one instead of this one. So every semester I've been here since 2016, I've been teaching this class. So I'm letting you know that because even though I'm jumping in the middle and it's going to be weird to have this transition, I'm going to talk about that, and I'm sorry about that. I think we're all sorry about that. I do have some pretty good material that's already prepared. And what I'm going to do with that is because now I'm really kind of overloading teaching, taking care of what, at least for this class, what Dr. Longo left when he got the other job, is I'm going to be relying heavily on my other material. So there's going to be a slight mismatch, but what I'm going to do is do my best to match where he was going. He gave me a final exam and a grading key for that. So the exam experience will remain the same for you guys. It'll be basically what you have been experiencing. That'll be what you have for the final. I did not make it. It's already made. I'm going to be taking a look at it to try to make sure I cover everything. I will recognize if I didn't cover something, and I'll either not grade that question or be very lenient when I grade that question. So I'm going to be trying to balance these things with you for the rest of the course. I don't know if you guys were expecting another homework assignment, and so I'll probably try to prepare something that I can assign to you guys and my other course. And essentially what I'm going to do, because I think this is the best way I can handle the teaching and give a good experience for you guys, is to match what I'm doing in my other class, because we did a little more advanced stuff earlier, the disinfection and things like that. And I'm going to basically match you with what I'm doing with my other class. That means today might be a little bit redundant from what you've heard, probably from a different perspective. And in the next class or two may also be a little bit of overlap, but hopefully not too much. So what I know in terms of where you've been at in terms of the class, I'm going to pull up the syllabus that I have. So I understand that you guys, well, the dates are not quite right, but I'm assuming you'd be something a little bit into biological processes, and that's kind of the theme. So my plan, just to give you a glance here, and by the way, I don't yet have access to Moodle, so I have no way of emailing all of you all at once if something were to happen or announcements. I have no way of posting to Moodle at this time. So really, we'll need to deal with course logistics, either you emailing me directly. Email's pretty simple. It's ssnow@lsu. And you can find my page on our website if you need. So email me if there's something specific, and then help spread the word if it's something that more people need. Otherwise, come to class for course logistics. I want to get onto Moodle, but until I do, I have no way of emailing all of you. Maybe I have a way. So I have the roster, and I'm not sure if the emails are there. I hope it is. So just bear that in mind. Right now, announcements are going to be totally in class like this. If you're sick and can't come to class, I do live stream. I'm going to come back to that because I wanted to show you the syllabus. Okay, so my plan for the rest of the semester was to today really go through some of the regulatory framework. My history is I worked 6 months as a permit writer for Michigan's Department of Environmental Quality right after I finished graduate school. And so I have a little bit of experience to share with that regard, spice it up a little bit, I hope. And then we'll get into wastewater microbiology. You probably already have touched on that, and get into kind of the essentials of wastewater treatment driven by microbiology, and then talk about how biological oxygen demand goes. That's my plan, and it matches reasonably well with what I've seen from the final exam. Like I said, I'm going to be trying to add and adapt a little bit as we go. Okay, any questions or concerns so far? Yes.
We have daily quizzes with Dr. Alonso. Are we going to continue that, or is that on the way?
Okay, so daily quizzes for this class, and if you happen to be in my other classes, I'm just not going to be able to handle that with 3. So whatever status you had so far is going to be, that's going to be it. I have no plans to do daily quizzes. I have no faith in my ability to handle that. If you are concerned about, you were expecting to have more opportunities to earn the grades, and that's a big concern to you, let me know, and I'll try to think of something we can do as sort of a participation kind of ad to provide that for you. But right now I have no plans of doing that. Like I said, class is going to be your only way of getting announcements for now, so it's probably important that you're here. And I think that I normally like to do something like that to encourage you to be here, because I do think there's things you learn just by kind of being present around the material. So encourage you to be here. I expect you to be here. But as I was going to say a moment ago, I do live stream my lectures. So if you are sick, that's a great reason to not come. But you'll see this is what I'm looking at as I'm looking at here, so that I can actually see what I'm writing on the board. And this is live streamed right now on Twitch. It's kind of funny, it's a gaming platform, but it works. I'm going to fix this.
Dr. Alonso also gave bonus points for office hours and bonus points for completing the end-of-course survey. Is that still...
Okay, so bonus points for office hours or end-of-course survey. Whatever is in the grade book already will certainly be counted. For end-of-course survey, we used to do that. I used to do that as well, but a recent change made it so I can't track. Like, it used to be that I could see who filled it out and yes or no, not the material, not what you filled out, but yes or no, did this person participate? And then I could do that accordingly. But now it's like, 34 of 50 students participated. That's all I get, and I might not even have access to that until after the final exam, after the final grades are due. I think the grades are completed, so I can't even see that till later. So I don't think I have a way to do that. If I find a way to do that, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
Is there any way we could take a screenshot? Because I think it does say completed whenever we completed it for the course. Could we email it to you maybe?
Yeah. So you guys were essentially expecting to have that, right? Okay. I can probably do that. We can do maybe I'll do a. Right now, it would have to be a Moodle email. If I get access to Moodle, maybe I'll have something where you can upload a screenshot. Yes.
We're going to have homeworks, right?
So homeworks, yes, I'll probably assign one homework, and that would be due. My plan generically would be to have it due this date and go over the solutions with you for that homework and answer any questions kind of in prep for the exam. Did you guys you didn't have any outstanding homeworks, right? Okay. So I think your grades should be current going into this transition, and now it's just me. We'll have one homework and the final. And again, the final is written by Dr. Ilongo, and the grading scheme or the answer sheet by him as well. Okay. So let me just show you real quick. We'll have a little bit of inception here. If you were to go to twitch.tv/snowslab, you'll see a few seconds delayed right here, okay? And so then if you wanted to chat to me, I think you need to log in, but there should be a way to chat. Okay, I'm not going to bother doing that, but if you do sign in, then you can chat to me. So if you do stay out because you're sick, I'll be watching that, and I'll be able to answer questions you put live. So, and I'll write that up on the board in a moment. It's twitch.tv/snowslab. The lectures will stay there for about 10 days, I think. I do download those for my other classes and upload those to Moodle. Since I don't have Moodle yet, probably just going to leave them there. So if you need them within 10 days, they'll be there. If I do get Moodle, or if you ask me, I can send you a link to basically the equivalent lectures that, or that lecture in particular. But you can always go here within the past 10 days and find that. I'll probably write that somewhere else for you later if you need. Okay, so with that, that's kind of the my approach here. Let me bring my screen back to myself. Okay. All right. Any questions or concerns before we get started? Yeah.
Were your notes, I'm not sure if it says, you uploaded or?
If I get access to Moodle, I will definitely upload my annotated notes for you. And so what I'm going to do in class is I've got a little writing pad and pen. And so I'll be, sorry. Apparently there's a link there. So I'll be writing on the pages. If I'm able to, I will definitely upload those for you. If not, you can go to the Twitch page and you'll see the screen, right? You see the little webcam picture, that's where my face is going to be. And so I just put that there as a placeholder for while I prepare my slides. Okay, so you'll have access to that. Okay. Any other questions, concerns? All right, so we probably talked a lot about disinfection at this point. I would assume you have. One of the things we can take a look at is the rate of typhoid fever in the US. And chlorination really started around 1910. Of course, it wasn't implemented fully. And when we did begin chlorinating, obviously that's going to help a lot with our food and waterborne disease. The other side of that, however, is wastewater. The ultimate route of transmission, always like to draw a funny diagram here. So if you consider some water source, got a river, stream, something like that, and you want to take water out of it to drink, you put in your nice little bottle of water there, or cup. Well, you have to consider what's coming into it, right? And so that's where our disinfection barrier comes in, at least in terms of water treatment on the potable water side. And that's one barrier. The second barrier is for when we have, let's say, a poorly drawn toilet here, and flushing, and it goes into the, it escapes into the river, right, or wherever your water is. And so the idea for wastewater then is have that second barrier. Well, I guess disinfection may be the primary barrier, the water treatment, but the wastewater treatment then is that second barrier. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is mitigate, prevent the fecal to oral route of transmission. So if you haven't heard that term, it's pretty nasty, but essentially that's what's going on. by the way, if you get pink eye, it's kind of the same deal. It's some sort of bacteria that likes to grow in warm-blooded animal guts or similar environments that's now growing in your eye. So if maybe you went swimming and the water was kind of dirty, or something like that. So antibiotics, typically what you need to clear out pink eye. It's kind of the deal. You don't want gut bacteria in the wrong place, right? And if you give it the opportunity and there's nutrients to grow, it may grow and be an infection if it's in the wrong place. So typhoid fever is the same deal. Pretty bad disease if you get it, but it is fortunately something that we can deal with pretty well with proper engineering and infrastructure. Okay, some other reasons, just a few pictures I took from Nicaragua actually. Gold mining, there's a kind of an illicit gold mining operation where they got mercury and the soil being processed here. They're just sort of discharging the wastewater down into the open, maybe a small sedimentation thing, but otherwise it's just discharged into the open. And now the mercury is presumably amalgamating and mostly staying in their little batch thing here, reactor sort of deal. But that's a lot of mercury that's going to be escaping into the environment. Obviously that's not a good thing. It's a landfill here with wastewater running through it. That's running into a river from there. That it's all green because it was somewhat treated wastewater. It's from a stabilization lagoon, lots of algae growing, just giving it the toxic green color. It's probably not actually toxics that are making it green. But certainly you can imagine all sorts of reasons why exposure to that would not be a good thing. So thinking about wastewater sources, we have industry, we have municipal, and the different types of toxins, the different types of contaminants that we want to deal with really depend on where they're coming from. So on the drinking water treatment side, you have to consider, okay, what source are you using? And then on the wastewater side, once you've sent that along, you're using it, industry or in homes, what kinds of wastewater are you dealing with? A lot of industries have nasty enough wastewater that they can't send it to a municipal treatment facility, or at least not without pre-treatment. So if an industry is generating such nasty wastewater that it's going to kill all the microbes in the biological processes down in the wastewater treatment plant, you actually have to pre-treat it to prevent the loss of the bacteria that are doing the work to remove the waste. Most wastewater treatment plants municipally are kind of designed to handle the wastewater coming from homes. There's also an issue, you may have heard of storm separate sewers. We didn't always separate our wastewater stream sewers from our stormwater sewers. So stormwater is a big important thing. We know it here very clearly in Louisiana. Storms a lot, we need a place for the water to go. A lot of municipalities, when building their infrastructure originally, just set that down to the sewer system because it was kind of dirty water. Maybe that would be a good place for it to go. It's a bad idea because then you're going to flood all the wastewater back out if you have a bad storm flood event. So nowadays, pretty much everybody's trying to separate their storm sewer systems, if they're not already separated. Okay, so that's sort of the big picture schematic. Another big picture schematic for a typical treatment process. You probably touched on this already, and we'll go into more depth in a bit. So I'm going to breeze a little quicker through this. So we've got primary treatment would essentially be the removal of the large debris, the grit, the stuff that might harm the plumbing, and whatever can settle in one session of a sedimentation chamber. From there, we have secondary treatment, which comprises almost always some sort of bioreactor. So we employ biology, employ microbes to chew up the digestible stuff and make a lot of cells. Then we can separate the cells. That's going to be in sedimentation or potentially a membrane for a membrane bioreactor or some other clever way to keep those bacteria in the bioreactor. So either we are recycling that sludge or keep using a membrane to keep it in the bioreactor. And then finally, we don't want to discharge all those bacteria into the wild, so we've got to disinfect it at that point. A lot of times that's going to be ultraviolet light. Sometimes it's chlorine, but then you have to remove the chlorine because you don't want to discharge chlorine into a river or wherever. So, lots to consider in that regard. Part of all this is the sludge processing. Well, I say part of. It's not typically counted as secondary treatment. What we're talking about secondary treatment is really the water component, but the solids that are produced in all of this are also important. It's a potentially beneficial resource. There's lots of nutrients bound up in those bacteria cells and all the other junk that accumulates. So if we treat it properly, there is an ability to use it as fertilizer. We call that application of biosolids, different classes of biosolids based on what kind of processing they received, what temperature did they achieve. We essentially let the biological activity in these sludge solids raise to a temperature where it's going to kill most of the pathogenic bacteria and organisms. There's still a few organisms that can tolerate the heat, and they'll just keep munching on stuff, and there's chemical reactions and all that. So there's a way to process them into higher quality biosolids that are safer to apply to land, and then we typically aren't going to apply them ever to a case where we're directly consuming that crop, right? It would have to be like sort of a secondary crop or some other stipulation. There's also some regulations about heavy metals accumulation. With the wastewater, you're probably going to accumulate some heavy metals here, and so they'll test the biosolids and then make some limit on how often you can apply them to a specific plot of land, and then at some limit you just can't do anymore. Question?
What is a secondary crop?
A secondary crop. So if you were to grow, and I'm not positive about the exact definition here, but it might be the case if you grow grain that's going to feed an animal, that would be secondary rather than primary grain that was going to be used for human feed. That still might be primary though, so it's going to depend a little bit on what its use is. If you're growing something and then you're going to process it into some other product that's not even a food product, maybe. So I'd have to look back in the definition. It's a good question about what exactly qualifies, but that is all kind of described in whatever laws and permits are there. Okay. So water quality standards, we often base them on the receiving water, and I'm going to talk primarily about discharge to surface water because that's where I have a bit of experience. There is also discharge to groundwater, the separate permitting system, similar features in terms of why we care about it, what we want to make sure we're protecting, and all of that. Okay, so a lot of times we're basing it on the fact that the receiving water, we want to make sure that we're not harming any potential intended use for that water. So if you imagine a very beautiful river that's flowing through and it's clear water and lots of different biodiversity, lots of fish, lots of wildlife, you want to make sure if you're going to discharge water there that you're not allowing for impairment of that water based on that wastewater discharge. And so you can consider if you had just not a bad wastewater, it's just a little hot, maybe high temperature, maybe it's just got a little bit of sugars in it or something. If you think about discharging that into a very clean body of water, maybe you're okay if you're doing a gallon a day. Maybe that's no problem at all, right? Dilution is going to help in that case. But if you try to do 10 million gallons per day into a small creek, you're creating a much larger creek by doing that. You're definitely impairing the system. So there's a lot that goes on both on the biological side. So there's biologists that review the assimilative capacity of the river or the stream or whatever. And there's some basic calculations that go through what can you do that's going to impair or not impair. So the intended uses, by the way, our permits are supposed to protect all intended uses. Now, there are bodies of water that are impaired by nature. So we have bodies of water in Louisiana that are slow and warm and stagnant and don't have much dissolved oxygen because there's just so much biological activity. They've got a lot of bacteria. They would be considered impaired even if there was no human activity anywhere, right? Impaired for an intended use of swimming, fishing, recreation. Certain things ideally we would define each specific body of water for what its intended use might be, but we have general classifications with only small deviations there. So it kind of depends. We have lots of impaired waterways. Can show you a couple graphs on that from the Permit Writer's Handbook in a little bit. Point being, we don't want to be causing that when we have a wastewater discharge. Okay, and in fact, the NPDES system, that's the essentially the surface water discharge permitting system, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. The initial aim was to reduce and eventually eliminate all discharges of pollutants. Well, it turns out that's not actually practical. We can't eliminate everything. However, if we reduce to the point where we are protecting all intended uses in the context of potential other wastewater discharges, so it's counting for all of that, then we, as a society, have decided that's a good plan. That's our best plan forward, because that way we can have both the industry and the protected intended uses. Now, permits then are interesting because what they do is they give a license to an industry or some entity to do something that would otherwise be illegal. Because if you pollute the river that flows through my backyard or something, and I wanted to fish in that river, then you've just removed a right that I had to fish in my backyard and consume the fish safely, right? You've then harmed me, or swim or whatever. So in that sense, if you have an industry that's polluting out the wazoo, then that's hurting people, right? Because people have intended uses for that particular water or environment. On the flip side, so that means these industries must reduce their pollution, must obtain a permit, and it's like a license to drive. You must earn that, apply for it, and then acquire that license to drive, which may be revoked if you are driving improperly, right? That's something that our government system, regulatory system, we can get a permit to drive, or it can be revoked. You can get a permit to discharge, or it can be revoked for cause. On the flip side of that, permits are actually very beneficial to industries because that takes the burden of proof off of the industry itself. Maybe you're just a mom and pop dry cleaning system and you wanted to have a way to process your industrial solvents and discharge some of the water after the processing, presumably it's clean, and you don't have a hookup to a municipal wastewater, so you wanted to discharge into your property's backyard or whatever. You're doing all the treatment right, but is the burden of proof that you're not contaminating the soil and the groundwater or wherever, if that's on that little mom and pop shop, there's no way they can afford the scientists to do the research, the lawyers to defend them in court, all of that. It's not actually a good thing for them, for that burden to be on them per se. Rather, the EPA takes that burden and says, okay, well, if you meet these standards, we'll give you a permit, then you're allowed. And so in that case, a lot of progress in terms of improving standards when they need to be improved have come from suing the EPA for not doing the job, right? So it's a strange world, but if an industry is taking a look at the whole permitting system and all of that with a reasonable mindset, they should be glad for it, because it's a way to authorize them to do something that otherwise they'd have to prove in a court of law or something that they should be allowed to do it. Okay, so I think you probably talked about the basics, so we'll go a little quickly through this. Conventional pollutants that wastewater treatment are aimed at removing would be biological oxygen demand, which is essentially microbe food. If you think about we undergo respiration by breathing in, we breathe in oxygen, some of that's converted to CO2, and we breathe out CO2. Bacteria are going to do the same thing as they're eating, as they're metabolizing, as they're creating more microbes. Essentially, we quantify that amount of food with the term BOD, biological oxygen demand. This is a loose term that really categorizes any substance that is going to allow a bacteria to grow in that manner, and to that bacteria will then demand oxygen from its surroundings by taking it in. And so if you were to discharge a water that contains a lot of BOD substances into a pond, chances are bacteria will start growing really rapidly, the dissolved oxygen will be depleted, and you'll have a fish kill, or basically a very unpleasant situation with an anoxic pond. Okay, so the way to deal with that then is to add oxygen. We see a little bioreactor here bubbling oxygen furiously, and that's just letting those microbes grow and grow and grow and consume all this BOD. They're demanding oxygen, so we're giving them oxygen. It's pretty simple. The overall equation, if you're thinking about it chemically, is going to be ultra simplified, is going to be oxygen plus some sort of dissolved organics. Now this could be sugars, could be proteins, fats, whatever components that the bacteria can chew apart and consume and digest, which is, by the way, what's happening in our stomachs to a large part. That's going to be not necessarily an oxygen-rich process, so different biochemistry going on, but kind of same concept. And you're going to produce carbon dioxide and more bacteria cells. So that's respiration, right? It's going to be bacterial cells. It's going to be energy for them metabolizing. Again, it's oversimplified, but you can kind of conceptualize it that way. Then we have total suspended solids, solid particles in the water, pH, fecal coliforms. That's essentially a category of bacteria that can grow at a slightly elevated temperature up to like 44 Celsius. 37 Celsius is body temperature, by the way, so you can think of that's like body temperature up and above a bit, maybe to 110 Fahrenheit. And so essentially fecal coliforms are a class of bacteria that likely come from a warm-blooded animal gut. And so it's also the type of bacteria that we're probably growing in here in a large amount. So when we discharge wastewater, we have to make sure that we've removed those fecal coliforms, at least to a point where we're not impairing the waterway, the intended uses. And then oil and grease. Now, you might think to yourself, well, is there really a lot of oil and grease going to be discharged? I'm going to remind you that these are the conventional ones, and one of the conventional reasons we need wastewater treatment is because we started having our rivers catch on fire. And that was, a lot of people thought that might not have been the ideal situation. And so here's the Cuyahoga River, I think back in the 50s, and the river's on fire, and there's a boat that's floating on the river also on fire. And then you might think to yourself, well, how do you fight a fire on a river? And if you take a bucket, you're not going to be too happy when you throw that bucket of greasy water onto the fire, right? Grease fires are no fun to begin with. So we'll take kind of a quick look at that kind of history there, and want to show a quick video of a more modern one. And by the way, please forgive me if I rely on videos a little bit. One thing I'm planning to do in the next few weeks is show some videos so I don't have to talk for 6.5 hours straight every Tuesday, Thursday. I don't think I'm going to be able to quite handle it, so part of that's just trying to achieve a good teaching experience. So I'm going to pull this up. Give me just a moment. Nobody minds watching videos in class, right? Okay, so this is a river in Moscow a few years back that caught fire after an oil line burst. So, different story, but same effect with oil slick on a river and kegs. Not the best video quality, but we get the picture. So kind of crazy and kind of scary to think about. What do you do about it? I suppose you let it burn through, and then you well, you stop the pipe from pumping any more oil slick in there, and then you let it burn through, I suppose, and try to protect anything that you can from burning down. So that's kind of crazy. The other link is an article about the picture we saw just before that, the Cuyahoga River. So about this picture. So if you're curious, it's a short article about that, and we'll revisit that when we take a look at the permit writer's manual thing. Okay, the other two types of pollutants are toxics, which are kind of what they sound like. Heavy metals, organic compounds that are toxic in nature. Could be like benzene, it's carcinogenic and toxic, stuff like that. Pesticides. And then we have non-conventional, which is obviously not the conventional list, and it's also not the toxic list. So you could have just labeled it everything else, right? The everything else category. So this would include chlorine, which is we don't really consider that a toxic. I mean, at high levels it is toxic in a sense, but we also ingest it on purpose, and we use it all the time. Ammonia, nitrate, nitrite, and phosphorus. These guys are primarily nutrients. So we talked about BOD as microbial food, which is true, but bacteria are also going to need these nutrients as well. So most of the time BOD is going to contain carbon and some of this stuff. There's generally an availability if you've got a lot of waste stuff. If you're talking about wastewater, there's a lot of stuff in it. There's going to be a lot of organic stuff. It means there's usually going to be a fair amount of nitrogen and at least enough phosphorus because, and the example of sugar really only has carbon. So if you just had sugar in water, maybe you can cause some bacteria to grow. But mostly they're going to also need nitrogen and some phosphorus. If you were to look at the ratio of this, there's actually quite a lot of research into what are the ratios for life. What is the carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus ratios in a human body? In algae cells, that's the Redfield ratio. It's an oceanography term. And a lot of times this is something around the order of 100 to like 15, 20, 10-ish to 1. And you could be more precise. I think the Redfield ratio might be 106 and 14 or something. I don't know. And 1. So essentially, you need about 100 times more carbon than you need phosphorus. But phosphorus is a macronutrient in that it's a component of DNA, or the molecules that we build DNA with. Nitrogen is more important. You need about, 5 or 6 times more carbon than nitrogen, but definitely 10 to 20 times more nitrogen than you need phosphorus. So this ratio is there, and in fact, if you take a look at specific types of wastewater, sometimes the way to treat them is to fertilize them. I visited a tissue recycling plant in Michigan. I lived in Michigan for 2 years. I grew up in Georgia, so I'm kind of a southerner. Then I lived 2 years in Michigan, then came to Louisiana. That's my real quick history for you. They have this tissue recycling. You take all sorts of like cardboard, other products that have fibrous tissues in them, and they'd be processing them, and they'd end up with this wastewater stream that had a lot of carbon in it. Tissue is predominantly like carbon molecules. And so they end up with this wastewater, and they need to treat it. They can't treat it with typical microbial methods because there's no nitrogen or phosphorus for the bacteria to grow, which is not typical, right? If for municipal wastewater, stuff's going to grow. There's all sorts of organic stuff decomposing. But it's such a specific source that they actually had to add bottles of fertilizer. You just take fertilizer off the shelf of some agriculture shop, and you pour it in, giving them nitrogen and phosphorus so that the bacteria could grow. They're no longer limited there, and they'll consume all that carbon waste. So there's some control there. And when I'm saying these are non-conventional, these are usually not necessarily addressed with the primary and secondary wastewater treatment, and we might need some sort of tertiary treatment to handle them. So I'm planning to come back and talk about that. I do know that there's, I took a quick look at the exam, and I noticed there's some stuff about the roles of different treatment processes in terms of nutrient removal and stuff like that. So I do plan to make sure I come back and visit that in some more depth. Okay, another video I'd like to share on primary treatment. I think you guys have already covered primary treatment, but this is just a fun one. The reason we need to remove different particles and stuff from water is because we don't want it clogging the plumbing in our wastewater systems so that they can actually function properly.
So-called flushable wipes getting stuck in the sewer systems.
I have never seen one dissolved.
They have to remove them on a daily basis.
Okay, so moral of the story: don't flush flushable wipes. They're not flushable, right? And quite a fatberg there. And who knew that fatberg was a word? Okay, so if you learn nothing, I've had people leave on my reviews, don't flush flushable wipes. That was it. By the way, I don't even know who gets the reviews. I think so. Dr. Longo is no longer working here, so it's not super relevant to him. And I think the reviews either are to him or I think Dr. John Pardus, he's the environmental coordinator for our group. He might be the one that is associated with the reviews. So I don't even know the situation there. I'm just going to do my best for you. And if you've got feedback for me, I'm happy to have it. If you've got feedback for the system, I guess that's throw it into the review thing or let us know. Actually not sure who that's going to be tagged to. Anyway, flushable wipes, not so flushable. Although I will say I have to make fun of the guy for saying never see it dissolve. What would it look like if it dissolved? Would you see it if it dissolved? So that was kind of silly. Okay. Got another little video here. It's just kind of showing a screen bar rack in action. It's not really a whole lot to look at, but we'll just pull it up real quick. So it's just a little mechanical automated system. It's just an advertisement for their product, I suppose, but you can kind of see water's flowing through and clogging up the bar rack. It's got an automated system to every so often essentially scrape the debris, bring them up, and deposit them into a little bin, which it just did, and then it will take that bin up to a garbage collection system, and then essentially you'd be landfilling it. You might dewater it. These particles that are caught in like the bar rack probably don't need to be dewatered. They're not, I mean, maybe a little bit, but not in the same way that a sludge would. It's got such a light density that it's not going to matter so much. Okay, so that's kind of the primary treatment is that kind of stuff, and then sedimentation, the first round of sedimentation. You guys have covered that. So it's all essentially using gravity, using simple separation to pre-treat the wastewater. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to do, and I need to pull this up, is kind of talk you through a little bit about this wastewater permitting manual, because it has a bit of history and a bit more context here. I'll end that too. Okay, so if I do get Moodle up and going, I will post both of these, that Cuyahoga River article for you, which is here, kind of revisiting the site of those disasters. I have a quote within here anyway, so we'll talk about that. Okay, so this is a document that I received when I was working as a permit writer. I went to Chicago, and there's a regional permit writers course. And it was an entry-level position. I just finished my graduate degree, and this session was a week-long course kind of a thing. Kind of helped remind me why I went so long in academics. I actually did like to use some analytical skills, and it just felt like this was mostly shuffling paperwork. Now, the theory behind the numbers was interesting to me, but as a permit writer, I didn't get to handle with any of that at my level. So, needless to say, when I went to this course, and it was like a classroom, probably about this size, about half the amount of people here. And then basically it was 8 hours a day, starting at like 7:30 or 8 in the morning. And then it was just a monotonous lecture about like this for 2.5 hours at a time, and hardly an inflection in the voice. It just got really, really old. It was kind of amusing how the delivery was amusing. There was some engaging aspects of it, and I got this nice permit writer's manual from it that I'm assuming I'm allowed to share. Let's see why not. So I'm just going to skim through briefly Module 1 and 2 here. If I do get a chance to post this, or if you're interested, you can ask for it directly. There's some interesting things in there, kind of in-depth on the regulatory structure of the different aspects of surface water discharge, wastewater treatment. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of go through, and normally I'm almost always just using PowerPoint, so this is kind of the one exception. I'll be skimming through a PDF for a little bit. But early legislation, we really began doing anything with water quality regulations back kind of the 1899 range, 1900. And that was specifically for navigation. So the first legal frameworks began in order to deal with navigational issues. Obviously, navigation is very important for commerce. And we really probably didn't have a good enough grasp on the science behind microbiology to really know better in some ways anyway. We're just starting to develop to get there. 1948, the Water Pollution Control Act, also navigation, but also started to be like, okay, well, this river's caught fire 5 times so far, maybe we should do something about it. So that was kind of the first case where we were really applying human health concerns to it. 1965 then is our Water Quality Act. This required standards for interstate waters. So that's kind of the first one that was dealing with, okay, this state is polluting and this state wants clean water. Like, how do we deal with that? That's not fair. So the Cuyahoga River, 1952 is when that picture was taken of that fire. In an article, maybe 16, 17 years later, in Time magazine, here's the description. Some river, chocolate brown, oily, bubbling with surface gases. It oozes rather than flows. Anyone who falls into the Cuyahoga does not drown, Cleveland's residents joke grimly. He decays. The Federal Water Pollution Control Administration dryly notes that the lower Cuyahoga has no visible signs of life, not even low forms such as leeches and sludge worms that usually thrive on wastes. It is also literally a fire hazard. So not a good state back a little over 50 years ago. So it kind of makes a lot of sense then why the 1970s there was a lot of energy towards environmental protection, towards getting a handle on some of these things when our rivers were catching on fire and nobody was doing anything about it. So the EPA was essentially instated in 1970 through an executive order, along with this Refuse Act permit program. And if anybody's ever concerned about, executive action and all the problems that this or that executive are doing, then, one good thing is a lot of times these get struck down and then remade through the legislation, which is really the proper way, but it's a way that our country seems to direct action and then figure out the right way to do it and get to refine it along the way. And it is unfortunate that it's not immediate in some ways, but it's probably best that it takes some revision, takes some time to get there in a careful manner. So the EPA in 1970 was established, and this Refuse Act permit program in 1970, but that part was struck down in courts. It was unlawful, found to be unlawful. So Congress began to fashion a new one. So by 1972, 73, so 1972, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act amendments were put forward. And this essentially established the core of this NPDES program that we have today. A couple things were added. The Clean Water Act in 1977 that added more focus on specific pollutants that at that time they had been finding, hey, the paper mills are always polluting with this thing. This is always a problem for the paper mills. Let's focus on that priority pollutant and make sure these paper mills are handled appropriately and always expected to handle that. Something like that. The Water Quality Act in 1987 focused a little more on water quality-based guidelines. So what's the quality of the water that's receiving this, and how can we make sure that that water quality is preserved properly? And also introduced the stormwater regulations as well. And by the way, a lot of the oil and grease, a lot of industries that were doing some sort of industrial process and just discharging their oil and grease, that's what was causing oil slicks on the rivers. And it turns out once you tell them you must stop doing that, they'll find ways to catch that, and then they'll suddenly realize, oh, we can reuse a lot of that. Just have to clean it up a bit, and then send it back through our process, and they save some money that way. So it wasn't all, it was actually a pretty good thing, a win-win for them to actually be cleaning up their waste. 1972, essentially the whole permitting program, this National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, they wanted to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. So their goals and policies include A, eliminate the discharge of pollutants. Eliminate all of it by 1985. They really found that to be not ever quite practical. You could even consider the temperature of water to be a pollutant, by the way. So a power plant generating power, whatever system they use, they're typically going to be using, from thermodynamics, the Carnot cycle. They're going to be having a heat source and a cool source, right? They're going to be deriving energy from that. And so what they use as a cool source almost always is large volumes of water from a natural waterway. And then they have to discharge their hotter processed water, even if they've done nothing to it, but run it by some heat transfer elements. It should be just as clean as it came in, maybe more so because they wanted to make sure it wasn't going to gunk up their pipes or whatever. And they need to discharge it, but sometimes temperature can be a problem. Temperature also correlates with dissolved oxygen. Hotter water contains less dissolved oxygen. So we actually regulate all sorts of power plants for wastewater discharges when the only thing they're discharging is the same water, a little bit cleaner, a little bit hotter, right? So even that would be considered a pollutant. And as you might imagine, unless you just wanted no power plants ever, that's not very reasonable. And we don't want no power plants ever. The reason we care about the environment is because people care about the environment, and we care about people, right? That's the process, that's the aims of environmental engineering, protecting the environment and protecting people from the environment, and for the sake of human prosperity. Okay, so in the interim goal, which is kind of what they have, a forever goal, I suppose, was they said to achieve by July 1st, 1981, wherever attainable, a level of water quality that provides protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife, and provides for recreation in and on the water. That is intended uses. So we mentioned intended uses earlier. That's the scope of intended uses. Anything that we might want to use the water for safely, we should be able to do. Again, that's what certainly makes sense. They also are saying prohibit discharge of toxic pollutants in toxic amounts. In toxic amounts is important. Dose makes the poison. If you have something that is toxic in tens of grams and you discharge 10 nanograms, that shouldn't be a problem, right? For most cases. Okay, so some basics about this NPDES permit program. Again, the groundwater systems are very much parallel, but in this program you can have a maximum permit term of 5 years. So I dealt with a lot of very simple permits when I was learning the system. It was 2015 when I was working there. And so a lot of stormwater discharge for, let's say, a auto repair shop. They have a lot of oil and grease in their processes, but it's not a major industrial effort. It's just they're changing oil and some of it spills, and they get oil and grease kind of everywhere in their work area. So they actually have to have a permit for the stormwater that's going to run off of their property. And so they have some basic treatment to capture some of the oil and grease in their drains, and they get permitted to do that. So that's a very simple permit. They'll be reviewed in 5 years. They have to apply for it again, just check the boxes and make sure they have this stuff in order. A larger process that's something more like an industrial, large-scale industrial system or a large water treatment plant, they're going to have to reapply every year and make sure that all their permits, all their stuff is in order accordingly. There's, of course, compliance deadlines and all that. There are also, so a lot of times the way the permits go is you're allowed to discharge up to this amount, or maybe a total amount of this per day or per amount of time. Because some wastewater flows are going to be 1 million gallons a day today and nothing tomorrow, or something maybe 10 million gallons a day every day of the year. Kind of the funniest cases I came across were public swimming pools, like Olympic-sized swimming pools. They contain about 1 million gallons of water. And if it's chlorinated and they have to flush the water once a year or so, they suddenly have 1 million gallons per day of a discharge of water, maybe at a faster rate than that if they discharge in half a day, right? So that's a massive discharge of water for somebody who never would have thought about wastewater, right? It's kind of a weird thing, but a lot of the public swimming pools have permits for NPDES water discharge. And so then there's some question, okay, do you have to retain that water in a retention area until the chlorine essentially decays? Or do you have to add something to remove the chlorine, react it away, then you can discharge? Or do you just what process do you have there in place to treat that water when they're not thinking at all about wastewater treatment? It's some lifeguard probably, right? Or a facilities manager there, right? So it can be kind of funny in some ways, and the scales are quite different. Okay, I mentioned the permit compliance is a shield. In a sense, if you have the permit, you are allowed to do this that you would otherwise be disallowed to do. So in that sense, obviously there's going to be penalties, financial, and potentially permits rescinded for permit violations. Sometimes it's a case where a facility is doing everything they're supposed to be doing, trying their best, but it happened to receive a lot of rain that previous week, and a lot of that rain worked its way into the wastewater system, and they discharged, and they were out of bounds of their fecal coliform counts that they're supposed to have. If a case like that were to happen, that the EPA or the NPDES governance, they're not really interested in revoking the permit altogether for this municipality. They're more interested in saying, hey, this is not allowed, so probably a fee, but it's not something they're trying to revoke. It's not something the facility did on purpose, but it's maybe something the facility needs to account for in the future. to avoid in the future. Okay, in 1976, there were 65 categories of toxic pollutants, 129 pollutants identified in total. That list is updated, I think, every 5 to 7 years. It's reviewed, see if anything needs to be added as these priority pollutants. Certainly there are more pollutants in the world, toxic ones, than just those, but really that catches pretty much all of the important industrial ones for the most part. So there's 21 industries that are categorized based on, okay, this type of industry generally creates this type of waste, so therefore this type of technology is going to be appropriate. So some regulations are created in a way that instead of, hey, you can't discharge any more than 10 micrograms per liter of this stuff, sometimes it'll be, okay, it's really hard to measure, it's really expensive to measure lead down below 10 micrograms per liter, but we want more removal than even that. So what we're going to prescribe is to say, hey, you must use this activated carbon system, or you must use XYZ type of system as a technology and do it properly and have the proper checks in place in order to satisfy this permit. And so then they're prescribed some sort of technology that we know that works. Of course, they're going to have a little bit of freedom in, okay, maybe I'll design it this way or have my consultants design it that way. But they have to meet the criteria there for the permit. And that would be a technology-based control. All right. Okay, another thing, a couple things here. So that pre-treatment I mentioned for some industries, if they're going to discharge to municipal system, some industries are required to have that pre-treatment. Okay, in 1987, one of the things that went on, and a little context here, so that these permitting programs and ADS programs, the EPA is the authority, but then they delegate it down to states typically if the states have decided to form their own Department of Environmental Quality with that authorization. You know, there's a few states that have not done that. So there's a few states that are just like, well, EPA will do it. We're not going to bother creating our system here. The permit fees are what pays for people to do the permit processing. So it's not like it's a revenue, a negative revenue to have to do it for a state. And in 1987, that authorization was extended to territories, I believe, and Indian tribes. So Native American tribes then were allowed to take that permitting authority on themselves because they will operate in their areas as their own authority. I don't believe that any have taken them up on that, so it's still EPA for them, but that's an option for them if they want to choose. There's some advantage to doing it locally if you know the person or if you have relationships with the industries. The enforcement and compliance might go a little more smoothly than having somebody fly in from Washington and say, you're doing this wrong, pay up. Knock knock. If you don't let us in to look, we're going to go grab the National Guard or whatever. I forget who exactly they bring, but it's pretty serious if the enforcement, if you come in as a compliance officer and they aren't interested in letting you in, there's some pretty serious ramifications there. Okay. Okay, the sludge management programs, that was added at that time as well. Okay, so in terms of the NPDES system, essentially any point source or any discharge that's going into waters of the U.S. are included there. And so the waters of the U.S. is an important criteria. We talked about what is a permit, like a license. So point sources are kind of the obvious ones. Here's the end of a pipe leading out here. A non-point source is less obvious. You can imagine like an engineered wetland, for example. You have a specific plot of land that is your water treatment, and then water is flowing out from that point or from that from that land area, that plot of area, into, across a boundary, I guess. And that would be considered your discharge, and that would not be a point source in that manner. Okay, so pollutants are just described pretty broadly. One thing that's interesting here is we don't consider, in terms of the NPDES system, we exclude sewage from vessels or injected waste. So injected, that's the groundwater system and does that. For vessels, if a ship comes into port in Louisiana, up the Mississippi, and they want to discharge their wastewater, they're not going through the NPDES system in terms of authorization. They're going to be dealing with someone else, probably within the Department of Commerce, NOAA, for the management of whether or not they're allowed to and what criteria they have to do to discharge any wastes. So it's a separate system there. Okay, we talked about conventional pollutants today. Waters of the U.S. This is interesting. How do we define what a water of the United States is? For the most part, it's what you'd think it is, except you have to make an exception if you're using a lagoon, an artificial lagoon. You create a pond for wastewater stabilization, wastewater treatment, kind of a rudimentary primary and secondary treatment strategy is just make a big pond, let the water be out there. There's a little bit of mixing from wind, and there's a little bit of anaerobic process happening underneath where it gets anoxic, a little bit of aerobic process happening on top. So it's actually a pretty good treatment option for low flows. But do you call that waters of the U.S.? No, you're dumping wastewater into it on purpose using that. But you would call a pond that you artificially created for a neighborhood or something, you would call that a waters of the U.S. So there's some distinction there, like, hey, we have to specifically put a caveat here. And one of the other ones that's difficult for the system in general is irrigation ditches for agriculture land. On the one hand, there's a lot of nutrient runoff that is very unfortunate that goes into our waters that are essentially running off from agricultural land. Irrigation ditches are used to transmit water and potentially fertilizer to the crops, but then typically on the side of a plot of land, there's a ditch that will drain a lot of that out. And a big environmental problem is that disposal or that traveling of the nutrients out away from the agriculture. It's a problem for the farmers too, because they wanted the nutrients to be taken by the plants. They don't want the nutrients to escape. That's wasted money. It's also a problem for the waters receiving. Okay, there's been a few Supreme Court rulings. I mentioned earlier, sue the EPA to make progress sometimes. It's a separate system for groundwater. It's typically exempted from waters of the U.S. in most cases. I mentioned the treatment lagoons. Okay, so after implementing lots of good wastewater treatment policies, regulations, having them in place for some time, in June of 2009, there's an article from the New York Times reading, "The first time Gene Roberts fell into the Cuyahoga in 1963, he worried he might die. He smelled so bad that his friends ran to stay upwind of him. Recently, he returned to the river carrying his fly fishing rod. In 20 minutes, he caught 6 smallmouth bass. It's a miracle," he said, at 58. "The river has come back to life. And today, it's home of more than 60 species of fish. Beavers, blue herons, bald eagles nest along the river's banks." By the way, smallmouth bass are particular. They like very clean water and lots of oxygen in the water. You're not really going to find them in lower oxygen water, so be hard-pressed to find them in southern Louisiana, possibly in the rivers, but I think there's mostly other species of bass in the Amite and Kobe. Possibly northern Louisiana. Same is true in Georgia. If you ever, I grew up in Georgia, you can find smallmouth bass there, but generally you're hard-pressed to find them unless you're North Georgia, fishing kind of the clearer smaller waters. Okay, just to wrap up, I want to show a few, couple of graphs here. This is 2015 data of different waterways that have been assessed for whether or not they are impaired or not. This font's way too small to read, and I take no blame for that because it's not my slides, right? But you can kind of see it. So these are assessed rivers and streams, and then the other one are lakes, reservoirs, and ponds. So if the dark color is impaired, there is a gray color that we really can't see that says threatened, so a small fraction are threatened. And then the lighter of the two dark colors is good. So 45% of the rivers and streams and 32% of the lakes, rivers, ponds are in good condition. All the others are then pretty much impaired or threatened. Like I said, this could just be there's too many bacteria counts when you measure, and maybe that's not the case all season long. Maybe that's natural causes, natural wildlife contributing to the bacteria, all that. We can also take a look at the causes. So I just mentioned pathogens. It's the number one cause for impairments. Sediment is the next one. So just having too much sediment kicked up, that may just be a lot of construction in the area, also potentially natural causes, right? Nutrients. So if we are discharging lots of phosphorus or something, lots of agriculture contributing to nutrient contamination. Also possible in some cases that might just be natural. Mercury. Funny case for mercury, while I was at Michigan's DEQ, there was lots of constant fighting about reducing mercury discharges, especially for the municipal wastewater treatment. Some time ago, municipal wastewater treatment had a big issue of mercury coming from dentist operation because they used the amalgamations and then make gold fittings, and they had to use mercury in the process and all that. They've since cleaned up that, and they capture their waste in that regard. However, they were blaming the wastewater discharges for all this mercury in their waterways when the coal-fired power plants were actually contributing a lot more that was going up into the air and depositing then from rain into the waterway. So if you did the math, it was like the wastewater is contributing about 1% of the total mercury load going into these systems, and they were sort of pointing the blame in the wrong direction. Okay, and then there's some others. I think this is probably a good place to stop. What I will say is next week, so on Tuesday next week, I'm planning on doing more of a seminar, again, trying to keep myself organized so that I'm doing the same things in both my classes, both 3110 sections. That way, next week, it makes sense for me to give you a Flint water crisis kind of a lecture. It's more of a seminar type of thing. A lot of people like it. You can catch it later if you want to go live, if you're already vacationing or whatever. So 1 week from today, that's my plan for you, because in the other class, I'm going to do exam review. Okay, so I'll see you guys on Thursday.